Or are you just throwing part?
Goodness.
You should just...
I got you.
It's part 66.
You thought you were going to be all stealth.
Well, I mean, if we're late on the starting point, I'm just going to randomly go for it. But I think technically part 2 would be 2.5.
Oh, we're live. I was like, what's going on? What's
that.
Keep up.
Okay.
Yeah, we were all at different tabs.
I am
she's
sick,
like,
okay? I am allowed to not keep up.
I disagree.
Yeah, put the cat back on.
Yeah, right. The cat was way more interesting anyway. So.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I would say interesting.
Like,
but he was
Ben,
cute.
do you have a cat? Because we could just upgrade two hosts. So.
Honestly, you could put. Yeah. No.
All right. The camera will stay focused on the cat. That is what you will watch if you decide to watch this episode.
The director has spoken. She has directed.
But yes, part 2-ish of the Briefcases stories. We have previously covered curses, the quadruple A wizardry, even hand, and the Bigfoot stuff, including some of Bombshells.
Right.
So
well,
the stuff.
definitely part 3.
We mostly
finished
did
Bombshells.
Yeah.
I think we talked Bombshells at the end of the Q&A.
And since we talked about it last time, I finally read Quadruple A Wizardry and actually Jury Duty. So, I'm actually did kind of research this time. So,
yes, the remaining things are Jury Duty, Cold Case, Day 1, Fistful of Warlocks, and Zoo Day from the Briefcases anthology. Some of these we have spoken of before.
Right. And we definitely started with Zoo Day because we were like, let's just get the new stuff out of the way.
Yeah, you can't wait on that for too long. But,
okay.
How about Jury Duty, since it's fresh in Justin's mind?
Yeah, I knew I was going to get tagged for that. So Jury Duty was fun for me anyway. Like I had heard some things where it was just like, Jury Duty, take it or leave it. It's not very exciting, but I liked that it was another one of those stories that kind of showed off the world without necessarily needing to end in violence. And I mean, it kind of did, right? Because Dresden. But Jury Duty takes place after Skin Game. And this takes place literally while they're moving Harry into Molly's place, which really, now that I'm thinking about it, answers more questions that I had from the book itself. So basically, it starts out with Dresden opening his mail from being dead for a year. And also, I mean, I guess he wasn't dead for the year, dead for a couple of months plus living on Creepy Island for a year. He's moving into Molly's place until he can find his own. So it is a loan. Apparently, he is going to get another place. He's got some junk mail, as you would expect from him. And then he had some stuff that had been held by the Better Future Society, who was the group that bought up the land that used to be his boarding house and everything like that. So he's there with Billy, who's helping him move in. Not a lot of details there, but he goes on about how the government has somehow tracked him down, and they have their little quips about how, the justice system isn't perfect, but it's what they've got. And, Billy's like, well, what do you want to do? Reset it back to 1776. And Dresden's like, no, I've got books to read, man. It's like, that's my point. Everybody hates the system, but everybody's going to do anything else than try and fix it. So that's why we've got what we've got. So nice little commentary there, if you're into that. He kind of hops and skips through the process, basically talking about how he shows up at XYZ courthouse. I can't remember the name of it. It's like Robert Downey Jr., in Chicago or whatever. He goes to the 14th floor. It was Robert J. Daly, I think. I can't remember the exact name, but so he goes to the 14th floor. He sits in a room with bad coffee because more tropes. And then, he thinks he's going to miss his ticket. But of course, this is Dresden. So he winds up on the jury. They fast forward to the trial and he's like, well, I'm, kind of a private investigator. So I kind of know some of what's going on. He's like, well, I used to keep track of the DAs and assistant DAs or secondary DAs, but I was dead for a little while. So, things.
Daily.
Right. Yeah. So things kind of fall off your radar at that point. And so he doesn't recognize the kid who's on the prosecution. And then he notices that the defender is alone at his table. He's like, shouldn't the dude have representation? a court-appointed attorney, if nothing else. And it comes out that the dude who basically looks like, your quintessential goon is representing himself. So they start getting into the case, opening statements, which, were abbreviated, but still there, and was kind of a nice throwback for me because I did some mock trials. So I'm like, oh yeah, some of this looks a little familiar. And so he talks about how, basically this guy, cornered the victim in an alley and beat him to death with a bowling pin that happened to be in a refuse bin because, lawyers can't say trash. But basically he found a bowling pin in a back alley and beat this guy. And so it's like, yep, that doesn't look good for the giant guy. And the victim was like 5'4" or something. He was on the shorter side. So it's like, so you got the hulking guy who is all scarred up and looks like he lived on the street. And then you've got the tiny guy who's the victim, right? No, because it's Dresden Files. So when the guy who's representing himself starts doing his questioning, and to interject real quick, so he's representing himself because the public defender wanted to do a plea deal, but the dude knows that he's innocent, and he's already done a dime, as he put it, 10 years in the penitentiary. So he's not going back. He's settled out. He got out of that life. He's got a family now. You can see things are starting to mount. So in cross-examination, basically, the prosecution calls all of their expert witnesses, but you only focus on one, who was the arresting police officer. And basically, the guy declines cross-examining everybody except for that police officer. And it comes out that the defendant had been turned into a giant bruise, I believe was how the arresting officer called it, by this tiny guy who has no business, hardly being able to defend himself. And then they also ask about, what about the little girl? And the cop's like, well, what do you know? What are you talking about? There was no little girl. We didn't find no little girl, and all of that stuff. So after cross-examination, everything, the judge calls recess until the next day, says, okay, everybody be back at 9 a.m. And Dresden's like, okay, well, great. I've got 16 hours. I don't need sleep because I'm Harry Dresden. I've got 16 hours to figure this out.
Especially since the winter mantle, right? It's like, sleep, chumps.
Right. Yeah. So it's like I had plenty of time to sleep when I was dead. So, because funny. Anyway, so he calls up Billy, and they go back to the alley and have a nice little sequence where he tries to get Billy to sniff up a year-old bloodstain. And it's like, come on, Dresden. Like, really? Why even try? And he starts working through how, the big guy probably didn't get his ass handed to him by a tiny mortal, which is part of why Dresden goes and investigates. And the cops didn't find whatever this little girl is. And, Dresden's history. So little girl instantly gets his attention anyway. So he starts thinking it through, and with the help of the winter mantle, starts thinking like a predator, and comes to the realization that, at this point in time, at the time of day and everything else that was going on, the predator tried to take the little girl, probably during the daytime, and got seen as a result of it. So really the defendant is a good Samaritan, in other words. And the reason why it went down the way that it did is because the creature, whatever it was stalking her and knew her routine. So working backwards for that, Dresden hangs out playing his guitar, pretending to be a homeless person on the side of the street.
We learned here Dresden has excellent taste in music.
Yeah, right. I know. I was like, hey, wait, I know all these songs. So, except for like maybe one that I can't remember right now. But it was like,
I think there was one I didn't recognize as well. The rest I was like, yeah, right on.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too, though, because like a lot of it is somewhat recent in pop culture as well. But, like his whole stint with Lash and learning how to play and everything. But, Johnny Cash Hurt and Behind Blue Eyes and
House of the Rising Sun.
House of the Rising Sun, yeah, that was one of the other big ones. So he played his 5 or 6 songs on repeat for a couple hours until the little girl gets off the bus, and he sends Billy to follow the little girl and realizes that she's being followed by another big creepy dude. So Dresden either on the street or ducks back down the alley a little bit, basically hexes the guy's cell phone from across the street. dude crouches and starts looking around, and Dresden basically takes a run at him, but the guy recognizes him, takes off running down the road. So Dresden's like, okay, well, you're smart twice then. So he starts to catch up to the guy, but there are 3 other goons down the street corral the girl into like a under construction nightclub, also a theme from Dresden Files. I'm curious if it really is one of the same nightclubs. Like, have you burned this one down before? Are we doing that again? You know, but basically the other goon runs inside. They lock the door. So Dresden goes around and comes in another way.
Yeah, he just shattered the entire front glass.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because the front door, he's like, the door was locked, but it's also made of glass. And then he gets inside because, yeah. There are a couple of nice quips about, being a wizard, he meddled. And then there was another one that it was like, regardless, I forget the credit that he gave, but he credits the quote.
Oh, no. Oh, I know this one.
Okay.
I could not stop laughing when I read it. It was, no matter how skillful the wizard, a knife between his shoulder blades will really cramp his style. That's the original quote from Stephen Bruce.
Right.
I'm going to find it exactly. It's like, no matter how badass the wizard, a smart guy with brains and a 357 it can really cramp his style.
47.
47. Okay. It was something
He
like
says
that.
that Cold Days because I'm re-listening to that or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So it's a fun quote, and I recognized it a little bit as well, but I didn't read it. It's just I had been part of a gaming guild that used that as their motto. So I was like, wait a minute, that's a reference. So they have that moment. He goes inside. Goons are there with a pretty little girl who, well, sorry, I'm saying pretty little girl, but in this case, she is a woman. But the woman who is the bad guy turns out to be the assistant DA's the assistant DA's assistant, who is there with the little girl who was originally intended to be the victim and a bunch of toughs, a bunch of thugs of some kind. It turns out that the assistant DA's assistant is, the latest junior member of the White Court and sent by Laura as like a milk run mission. They sent her with one of the more learned or experienced of the bodyguard types because they catch Dresden in a pincer, but he's a wizard, so he cheats, and he hexed out all the lights and everything and basically does a in the dark kind of badass sequence right before, while they're sparring words and everything, because White Court and Dresden, you get a little bit of one-liners and things like that. She makes a quip about like, what do you think this is, a comic book or something like that? And so while he's running around in the dark, he punches a guard and he's like, pow, and another one he's like, blam, and stuff like that. So he fights the guards in the dark. He basically gets a hold of the White Court gal, talks all the other guards down, find out that the smart guard, as he calls him, is named Riley. So now we've got a name. So of course we'll never see him again. And then the White Court chick's name was Tanya. And I guess right before this, while they're making their quips and everything like that, the other important one-liner I was even talking about before the show, I'm pretty sure it was before the show. You might have hit record by then. But it was the line. It's like, maybe you should ask the Red Court what happened the last time a vampire tried to keep a little girl from me, which was a great little moment. So I like this story because there were a lot of references to, other things in the Dresden Files, if it didn't set anything else up necessarily, but it does kind of reveal some of what's going on. So he gets away with the girl. Billy helps him during the guard fight, take out smart guard when the guard was going to take him out. That was the whole, regardless of how subtle the wizard, the 45 will really cramp his style. That's when Billy shows up out of the darkness, literally to save Dresden. And then they go back to the court, and, it should surprise everybody to find out that in the jury, if you understand the process, basically everybody thought that the thug was guilty except for Dresden, since he was a juror. And the behind the scenes there and how everything goes down, he discusses this with Tanya while they're talking and everything like that, is that Marcone pulled strings to put Dresden on the jury because the defendant was one of Marcone's old guys. And the defendant had gone to jail previously because he refused to rat out Marcone. So this was Marcone attempting to balance the scales. And like, first of all, I'm sure he knows that he doesn't do it, or at least didn't do it, and at least believes his guy, and then wanted to set Dresden up to help his guy to avoid further, jail terms and everything like that. So Dresden hangs the jury, and then, the judge asks if they're going to try and do like a retrial. And Tanya, who's the assistant DA's assistant, says no. So they have a nice little argument right there on the floor, but it's all whispered, so we don't really get any details. Talks the guy down, and basically it gets it's done at that point. So the defendant goes free, etc., because they decide not to re-up the case. But there were just a lot of fun nods, especially from the last several books. The Better Future Society, Marcone being involved still, directly. Like, we always knew he was up to shenanigans like prior to Skin Game, but now we're directly like, nope, that was Marcone. That was Marcone. Like, we can start to see some of that going on. And Dresden even says, hell, Mab was probably in on it too, which I think is funny, because in my mind, I was just like, she probably was just like, hey, you want to know something funny? Why don't you do this? Because I doubt there was any more like, trading of gifts or anything to be had at that point. But it was just like, you really want to get Dresden's ire, you should do this, just as a fun little laugh for her night. But it was a fun little thing. Dresden roughed up a couple of the guards, but nobody died, which has been pretty standard in some of the short stories. So it wasn't too bad. And then, the defendant gets to go home to his family and everything like that, which is always a good, touching, happy ending for that. So I think that was about it.
Mm-hmm.
That was about it.
All right. Yeah.
Anyone else have opinions about that, or did Justin cover everything?
Well, cover synopsis. I think it's a good story. I don't understand why people are like, take it or leave it. It's like I thought it was
because there's not a lot of action. People like action.
How is there not a lot of action? There was like gunfights in a nightclub and a werewolf and
comparatively small.
I know that Jim Butcher does a lot of action in his books, but there's action but like, I mean, come on. I mean, even if there was no fight, it's still good. It's a lovely like day in the life, slice of life, kind of like the day off thing.
Right. And that, so in his little foreword that he writes for all of his short stories, he talks about how, like, it's tricky writing, your wizard. And it's like, if you look at stage magicians, you've only got three kinds. You've got your super competent guy who's dark and mysterious, which is really hard to write when you're writing from a first person perspective. You've got your glamorous one, and then you've got your bumbling fool. And whatever. And so he talks about that, and he talks about how, you can't always just show up and solve everything with magic, because that's not super interesting. So what helps make it interesting is showing Dresden have to be a bumbling fool, but for like normal everyday stuff, to see him just totally fail at being a normal adult. And
those are the part that was the part of the story that I personally liked the most. And the trouble is, it kind of ditches that fairly early on. He kind of gets right back into his groove after he's sworn into the jury, pretty much, after he sees the case.
Go ahead.
I guess my main thing is, I love the premise. It just doesn't do anything with the premise. And it just kind of uses that as a framing device for a pretty standard whodunit kind of, or how catch 'em kind of story. Oh, and then it's just her. And then I just rescue, and then I hang the jury.
Right.
So rather than really doing anything 12 Angry Men style interesting with the jury or with the court, it just kind of is one more thing tacked on top of a pretty standard.
Isn't 12 Angry Men the one where he goes and investigate on his own?
Yes, the jury.
Off screen. Off screen, yeah. He does, but you don't see it, right? It's kind of dramatic. He finds the switchblade and he just throws it down on the desk. So something like that, where it's a little bit more talky, a little bit more AAA wizardry, or quadruple A wizardry, whatever, 4A, 4H wizardry. It's more into the execution than the premise. And I think a good short story really has to be super focused, right?
Right.
Because there's only one idea you can really fit in a short story and really flesh it out. Whereas this, it sprinkles in a bunch of stuff and it just comes off like a casserole.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things I was going to bring up is like at the end of the day, it is a short story. And I think part of his forward for this one was the fact that he probably wrote this one while he was in the middle of another move. And, you know, as a result, it's not some of his best work and blah, 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 and whatever. So, you know, it definitely has that, like, it would be great to see this fleshed out into like his normal format, right? Where you've got your A, B, and maybe your C plot, and, you know, it gets super deep into the whodunit and, you know, all of this stuff. But,
I think a short story, though, can't really have the A, B, C. It has to have
what I'm saying is it would have been great as a case file, but, you know, as it is,
it could easily have been more fleshed than one of the side stories that ties into something else in a case file.
I mean, at this point, I think it will, because the fact that Lara is trying to train up her younger people now, and Marcone is still trying to defend his people, and they're butting heads, even if it is small at this point. The fact that we got the gunman's name, and it's Riley, this is going to blow up into something more. Maybe not a whole lot, but it's going to come back.
Right. He didn't get properly off the red shirt list because we didn't get a last name, if I recall. But, you know, like all of that stuff was there, right? So they have the potential of seeing them again, certainly as part of her delegation when they show up at, you know, peace talks and all that jazz. And, you know, talking about how, like, there's a little bit of a quip about how, you know, like, you don't seem to understand at Dresden, this is really between us and Marcone doesn't seem to care as much, even though he pulled strings to put Dresden in there, and Dresden's like, yeah, except you don't seem to give a shit, or you don't seem to get it. I don't give a shit about whatever your politics is. This is about her and the defendant.
Like, it was really good how oblivious she was to the fact that he doesn't care about what Marcone wants. He doesn't care about what they want. All he was like, do you want to go home?
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. Hello, little girl. Would you like to go home and see your mommy? Cool. Let's make that happen. You know. So
and she just didn't understand. She's like flabbergasted. Like, what?
Right. Yeah, that and the whole, like, so he gets a hold of the White Court vampire, and you know, she tries to put the White Court whammy on him, and he just like squeezes her until her bones creak, and then she stops, and then he burns her with his shitty shield bracelet, because apparently we're doing some of that again. And, you know, just stuff like that, where it's like, it's funny because I feel like she was trying to do the, like, don't you know who I am? You know, I'm Laura's third, second cousin's roommate's brother's sister's girlfriend. And it's like, I'm fucking Harry Dresden. Like, maybe you should have gotten briefed before you came out here.
When he realizes that she's very young, and he's like, how old are you? He's like, I'm 20. I'm not a child.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like, not your child.
If you have to say that, you're kind of a child.
And especially at Dresden's age, right? Like, because he talks about, you know, being in his mid 40s and everything like that. And yeah, how his bones creak all the time and whatever. You're a child, especially to Dresden.
Not with the winter mantle anymore. Now he's a spring chicken.
Yeah. So
as long as you don't put iron in him.
Right. Yes. Okay. So do we have anything else for jury duty?
Thought it was good, a little rushed, but you know,
sure,
that's a short story. So
I enjoyed it, and I like references to Stephen Bruce.
Right.
That is my full opinion.
You put it up on the board, guys. So
I'd give it a C-, but I'll give it a C+ so people don't lynch me.
We'll see you out.
Give it a C something?
Yeah, right.
Well, you'd have to find a sturdy enough branch to lynch me.
So. And in California, that might be hard right now. But
it's funny
with Dresden Files, it's at A scale only. It just is how many pluses you give it. So, you know.
Yeah. I mean, like, Ghost Story is like A-. So.
No, that's completely not true.
So we should have a whole episode on a Ghost Story retrospective. Ghost Story years later.
I just listened to it again this week, actually, and it wasn't that bad.
Did you have Charles Nelson Riley?
It's your European sensibilities coming through that you think the story's not that bad.
Is it Stockholm Syndrome talking? Like, where you've read it for 4 times?
Some of the things that I read. I really want to catch up with Mort soon again. Like, that was good. He's cool. He's actually pretty cool.
So, did we already talk about Cold Case? Is that already an episode dedicated to that? Or
There
we
was,
did
yeah.
Yeah, we did an episode for that. I don't think you guys were on board at the time, but
So
Your
if
oversight.
people would like to add your opinions to it, we can do that.
Where does this fit in your 4-point scale there, Ben?
It's one of the ones that kind of made me worry about the future of the series because I thought I was worried that he kind of peaked with his writing until I read Zoo Day because I was just reading straight through. I thought it was one of the weaker cases, one of the weaker stories in there. Despite a lot of good world building and a lot of interesting ideas, it had a lot of little touches that seemed there kind of for shock value. But my problem was I've read the introduction before I read the story, where it's like, oh well, this is just a normal story, and then it's revealed what the tribute is from the Alaskan Fae people, the Unalaska Fae. They take the children. Oh, that's so dark. And it just kind of seemed.
Fairies, that's their thing, right? Like that's come out a bunch of times in the series, but this is the first time we've seen them do it to themselves, like in a way.
Mad soldiers. I mean, fighting a war, you need some bodies.
Oh yeah, no, it makes sense in the world. The introduction of that idea seemed a little bit off. It seemed a little bit not terribly well built up. Maybe in her inner monologue. Although I really liked Molly's inner monologue. I really liked that aspect of it. It would have been nice to have that a little bit more hinted at in her inner monologue in that short story than for just to be completely out of left field. Even though you do see like a little bit of dialogue from the Unalaska Fae before, and just before it's revealed. The tribute thing didn't quite work. And then it was just another Cthulhu monster cultist. I'm like, kind of.
But where did you said it made you a little worried, and you thought maybe, where did you think his writing had peaked?
Well, I was worried at that time that it had peaked with with Cold Days or with Changes. But of course, reading Zoo Day, I'm not worried at all. Right now, it was just in the midst.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
So you read Skin Games, and you thought he had peaked with Changes for Cold Days.
Cold Days is better than Skin Games, but maybe it tastes better.
You can't see my face right now.
Where do you find these guys?
Skin Games is great. It's not as impactful as Changes or Cold Days. They're very big plot moving books.
Okay, I like Ocean's 12 as much as anybody.
Damn, is it a good story?
I like Ocean's 12 as much as anybody. We don't have to talk about Ocean's 12. Thank you, though.
Cold Days, motherfucker.
I was thinking Reservoir Dogs a little bit more, but okay. So.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I guess there's not nearly as much everybody dying at the end, but
Ocean's 12 is in Europe, so that's kind of why I brought it.
Okay.
Also, Jim did say he was watching the Ocean's movies over and over again while
writing that.
Oh. I did like it though. Anyway, EG, do you have a?
So, all right. So let's see. We're doing Cold Case, blah blah blah. So Cold Case, just the quick recap. I like how you were like, it's just another story with Cthulhu cultists, even though this is pretty much the only story we've gotten to actually confirm.
In the Dresden Files. But there are tons of stories about Cthulhu cultists. There's board games about Cthulhu cultists.
I've never read another book with Cthulhu cultists.
In pop culture, but for me, this one was a much bigger story because this has been a theory that I've been holding on to for a long time because, especially among the hosts, it's been like, no one seems to blink when the Necronomicon's brought up. No one had really read Warcry, things like that. So there are very blatant H.P. Lovecraft references, but this one was pretty much like, P.S. I'm not going to hint anymore. It's freaking Cthulhu because we've got the, insider, as somebody likes to call them, down in the Pacific, the Dreamer. It's like, okay, come on, just fucking say his name because we know who it is at this point,
I like the insight you get in that story into some fairy mechanics, like that you don't normally get. like how when Molly wants something, but it's against fairy nature, it's like she just like something else comes out.
Right. Yeah, the laws and just being a fairy just kind of takes over. Like she thinks, "Hey, fuck you," but really it says, that's not really that's not really a thing you should do, or whatever. So
even when she just wants to do something as banal as tell the truth, she can't.
Right.
That's the aspect. That's another aspect I really liked about the story, is that it kind of gives you a little bit of sympathy for how Mab has to deal with people, because Mab has to be under something like that or worse.
Definitely worse.
Yeah,
Mab's just as straightforward as Molly is.
And it kind of depends, though, because it depends on how much of that is her doing and how much of that is, if she was created, which is one of the more prevailing theories, right? That the she were created to take over from the Norse or whatever. But, with Mab's case, like she made the Accords. So, to break the Accords would definitely be thwarting Mab's rule. Whereas like the whole, take their firstborn and start and use them for a war, that's probably something imposed on them for sure.
It does kind of illustrate why she don't have free will, too.
See, and I say imposed on them, but even Mab says, like, I'm open to alternatives, so that one's on her, too. So,
well, it's on her insofar as this is what winter is. This is what they do. This is how they think. This is what is the most practical approach. You have kids. You have the ability to make soldiers. You need soldiers. So this is what you do.
Child soldiers.
She's perfectly happy. If Molly comes up with a way to, make a bunch of golems or something, I'm sure she'd be fine with that if that works as an alternative instead of taking kids. But this is what they got.
Yeah, and clearly probably doesn't work that way since, it's Mab and she's got ins with the White Council and a bunch of other people. It's like if there was a way to do an army of golems, we would have seen it already,
Right.
So, thinking that's one of those things that might require some life sacrifice to work.
Right. Well, because the next step for me was thinking about crap. I can't remember his name, Kemmler. And the whole we could just use corpses to do it, but somebody tried to do that before, and the White Council threw a tizzy fit. So,
So, what are your thoughts on how Ramirez is going to end up? Because he gets mauled, he's going to recuperate.
Well, they show him in the first chapter of Peace Talks.
In the previous.
Oh, of Peace Talks.
Yeah, the first chapter.
Did you read that chapter?
No, I don't have access to it. I wasn't around at the time.
Everybody who backed the Kickstarter for the Dresden Files cooperative card game got a hold of it, and
those of us who didn't still got a hold of it because people can't help themselves.
But not on the subreddit.
Right, I was going to say.
No, it was up there for like 5 seconds.
The internet somewhere, you probably have found it as well, or could find it. Not that I'm encouraging that or anything, but basically, for the minor spoiler there, Ramirez is there and he walks with a limp, but that was about it for now.
And a cane, wasn't it? Didn't he have a cane?
Could be, yeah. Being Butcher, like I fully expect we're going to get the, old man Gordon, types of tropes or something where it's like he's chasing the bad guy down the alley and the bad guy like leaps a fence and he's like, fuck, it's like, what am I supposed to do with that?
He's clearly in a better state than Dresden was because he's walking. So he'll be okay. Even if it takes 5 years, he'll be okay. And he's still young.
Well, eventually, but peace talks. That's what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, but that's why Harry's involved in the first place, is because he was tasked with running security for this thing and he can't do it.
Right.
Plus you have to consider this is also a year later. I mean, Cold Case was Molly's first week on the job. So everything that happens in...
If I remember right, he said that it's months. Like, it's speeding up the timeline. It's not going to be a year between books.
No. I mean, the difference between Cold Case and Skin Game was that same year that Harry's on the island. So Ramirez has already had a year to recuperate. Molly's already had a year in the gig, which is why when she talks later on about how she feels about the job... you see at the end of Cold Case, she's all distraught about the job, and now a year later, she's kind of understood what's at stake, what's going on.
Settled into it.
Yeah.
Right.
So he's already had a year to recover.
But still
He's
hasn't
walked
told her
again.
parents.
Well,
Because we
I
gotta
wouldn't
save
tell
that
my
for one of the-
parents either if they were super religious like that and already had a problem with me having pink hair.
No, fuck that noise. Be like, I can make ice cubes. Do you know how cool of a party trick that shit is? Like,
To be fair, she could probably make ice cubes before.
illusory
Maybe.
ones. We're talking about the real deal
No,
now.
I'm sure she could make actual ice cubes.
I'd
Yeah,
be
but
like,
this
hold on,
time
guys.
she can make the ice cubes and still party afterward.
There you go.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Just collapse, exhausted, like Dresden in the first 7 books.
Well, her tolerance level for alcohol now must be just off the charts.
Right.
Probably just like water. What about any implications this has for her transitioning into Fae or not at the end of Skin Game? There's only one Skin Game, Andreas. It's not Skin Game.
It's the implication is that she is Fae.
Yeah,
She is for sure. And
She's
it's not as
saying
far off.
everything, but
Yeah, I mean, when she got the mantle, she
completion.
became Fae, basically.
Right.
Yeah, they even when Lily became the Summer Lady, she was still a changeling. Technically, she did not choose to be a Fae, and she was still a changeling. They established that. So technically, she's still human, but she's also getting weird Fae things. So there's like she's in between.
Right.
Well,
I mean, by
there's
the-
that line.
She's
There's
still
that
gotten
line.
out, is what I believe the word of Jim is still. That, you know, she's not fully 100% gobbled up, but, you know, if you stay long enough, you will be. So,
it's
Because
not
there's that
instant,
aspect.
but it is inevitable.
There's the line in Cold Case that I was thinking of, where she has to correct herself from using the word mortals, humans. I mean humans, not mortals.
right.
And so,
Well,
or
and
even
I
their
think
thinking
it's,
is changing.
I think it's like the Winter Night Mantle, where it is definitely imposing on her thoughts. And, you know, Harry, you see Harry fight it all the time. She's doing it a fair bit as well. But, you know, for a nice round number, we could invoke the ship of Theseus for the second time today and say, what about 7 years? Then she's no longer the Molly she was before she got the mantle, and she's now fully the Fae Molly.
Because I'm re-listening to Cold. No, wait, Cold Days. Yeah, right now.
Old days. Yeah.
I mean, Aurora had that's her name, right? Or is that the first
Lily.
one?
You're thinking Lily.
Lily,
Yeah.
Aurora's the
had
time
basically
star.
become Aurora in physical appearance. He said that if he didn't know better, he would have thought it was the same person.
So what's the time difference there? You know, it's
about
book
10
4
years?
versus 12, right? So would you say that's 7 or 8 years? You know, so
I think they said about 10 years.
Yeah, it was
So-
about 10, and Bob said if she's pretty much gone, give it another 10, she'll definitely be gone.
there you go.
Now, the only thing with this is, one, Molly, like Harry, is a pseudo main character. Two, the way that everything goes in the Dresden Files now that Harry's involved kind of involves bucking the trend.
Mhm.
Everything in the supernatural world is an upheaval. My guess is because Maeve was the way she was, because she wasn't really doing her job, she succumbed quicker. So Molly's going to be Molly pretty much throughout the story, just like Harry will be Harry.
Right.
We're not going to see Maeve again. We're going
No,
to
yeah.
see a competent Winter Lady, which is the whole point.
There's also a clear problem with how Molly was forced into being the Winter Lady, and the whole like people are supposed to definitely have free will.
That
Yeah,
is
but
an
they don't care
implication.
about that except when it comes to Daenerys.
No, but that's not only Daenerys, like it's everything. Like that's like the whole point, right? Like the whole point of the White God and the angels is like free will must be
Yeah, but-
protected.
That's lip service. They don't interfere unless Daenerys start. I mean, Mab and the fairies break free will all the time. You don't see Uriel coming down for them.
No,
They-
there's bargains though.
Yeah.
There's always a bargain involved. A
Yeah,
free will
bargain.
Decision.
They might make it seem like you don't have a choice, but you do have a choice.
Right.
Like, and you make the choice.
Usually you've made it by the time they're breaking your free will. You know, like you already made that choice. But
I don't know that a kid that walks across a
I
bridge.
just hope this is
Take
something
that
that actually like comes up and gets resolved, like gets explained how Marley's free will was kind of taken away by becoming the Winter Lady.
because
She
she
didn't
made her
choose to
choices.
become the Winter Lady.
Well, even
refugees-
even the
Well,
Earl King operates by respecting free will. Join or die. Right. There's always a choice.
It may
Well,
not be
but
a happy
what
choice, but
Eugene's-
yes.
what EG's point is, though, is the whole like you walk across the bridge and the troll eats you. You know, there's some law of the jungle stuff going on there that you'd have to figure out. I mean, maybe you could argue that your choice was to cross the bridge regardless, but there's always been a bit of weirdness to me that I don't feel like I have 100% answer on. The fact that Michael clearly uses the sword against fairies, even though it's not its true full purpose. He sometimes gets a little bit of a boost from the other side anyway. Like, think about it. He took down one of the big D's. He didn't do that by himself with a steel sword. He got help,
and vampires and the Hobbs, which are the Fae. I mean, they fight evil in general, but
so the White God definitely tips the scales even with the fairies at times, but just not as much, and maybe hopefully we'll get an answer someday. But yeah, it's definitely something I don't feel like we've got a solid understanding for.
That's just something I hope we'll get.
My guess is it's because angels are angels. They've been around since loosely forever. They're the ones who, like Uriel said, are held to a higher standard. So, even if they're fallen, they still have to play by a preset of rules. Whereas the others, the Fae have their own rules to deal with, but like how when we're first really introduced to that world in Summer Night, and how they say the queens can't directly kill someone, but they could trick you into falling asleep for 100 years, or you could make you a glamour and you fall into a swamp. Right. I mean, that they can do things.
Yeah, but the whole thing with protecting free will is like, specifically when it comes to Mab and Mab trying to present to Harry, and like, you don't have any choice, you don't have any free will, and then Uriel's like, you always have a choice.
Right, but from Mab's point of view, he doesn't, because her history is every single night has been broken.
He does that, so clearly he cares even when it's a fairy trying to take away mortals' free will. I just think that it would be good to have it like clarified why Molly seems to have taken her free will away from her.
Well, and I think the whole, I never got sold on her being the best fit for the mantle thing anyway after Cold Days. So it's like, I get that Leah was quote unquote grooming her, but since all of that shit happened off screen, it just seemed kind of forced a little bit, which I think is your main argument as well. So, like
it was,
we'll see that play out, or maybe we'll have her, fill Dresden in on what actually happened at some point, or something along those lines. But I imagine it's going to jive, to the rules that we understand. We just, because it happened off screen and you don't like it, you feel cheated, So wait a minute.
Probably along the lines of what Uriel says at the end of Ghost Story, where she's, just because Molly didn't necessarily recognize the path she was on it, she chose to go on it, and so that's a fair ball. Right. So same thing, she's working with Leah just because she doesn't have the wherewithal to realize she might be being groomed as a vessel. Doesn't change that she said, okay, you can train me, you can do whatever.
It'd be interesting to see how it plays out, though. I think it could go either way if Jim changes his mind. Continuity with the Dresden Files hasn't always been really hard and fast. There's a lot of weirdness early on. There's a lot that can still change just because he says so.
I would say after Poe's book, and he still tries to include the first 3 books, but no, I would say actually from book 3 and forward, he seems fairly consistent.
I guess once he stops introducing supernatural powers, I'd say he's consistent. But I think even there's some weird Fae stuff in book 4.
Yeah, and he owns that, though, and that's why we get to look forward to book 19, where he gets to go do his time travel shenanigans and fix all that shit and make it fit somehow. So.
I think the operative point somebody mentioned here, though, is that Molly, after 10 years, she's no longer going to be human. She's going to be full Fae, not even mortal. I don't think the Dresden Files universe is going to make it another in-universe 10 years.
Right.
Yeah, it's no way.
No, it's starting to. That's also why the timeline's ramping up.
It totally possibly could do another 10 years, because in 10 years, Maggie's going to be an adult.
Yeah, but
we're gonna. The problem is
fighting side by side with him now.
We don't have enough books for that. So unless we start doing 2 and 3 years between books, or the BAT takes like a 10-year hiatus because reasons.
Because if you have a time skip between book 20 or 25 or whatever the last one ends up being, and Big Apocalypse Trilogy, but I think Molly's going to be out of the Winter Lady gig at least by the end of the regular case files, either as Winter, as maybe she's Mab now, or maybe she's not. But
Well, she's either Mab or
I
she's
think
dead.
she's staying as lady.
Harry might get out of his job, but Molly's either Mab or she's dead. Or, she could stay the Winter Lady. That's fine, too. But in general, she's not getting out of her job,
I mean, if with the ascendancy of the Fae and their last conjunction or whatever it was, I think the Fae themselves might fall, and there might be some new order.
And that's definitely something that I feel as well. I mean, if you think about it, the last time the cycle happened, the last time there was somebody leaning on the balance was Rashid. The last time the balance shifted was, Hastings. I really think that at this point they are going to finally hand off the mantle of control to mortal kind. Like I think there's a decent case to be made for that theory. And basically think about it. Peace talks, they're going to blow the lid all the way off of it. So you're going to lose control regardless. So you might as well hand to the people that were really truly in control the whole time anyway. Because mortals aren't clued in because they don't want to be clued in. But as soon as that changes, they have all the power. They have all the cards.
One of the I think you're thinking too small. Even I think outsiders be gone by the end of the Big Hop trilogy. They're done forever. No more outsiders, and then there's no more need for the gate.
Guardians.
Yeah,
exactly right.
It could be, but I think the reason why I'm thinking too small is I can't imagine how it would happen. Like the White God didn't make it happen, so
because Harry's the fulcrum, not the White God.
I'm thinking that last line in Andreas's favorite book, or one of the last scenes, is Michael saying to Harry, "You think the most important thing about the sword of faith, is the word sword. So all you need is take one of the." Anyway, I got my whole end game theory there, but I think there's a way. I think
next episode, Ben's crazy endgame theory.
We know that the outsiders basically, I don't know if they were on Earth specifically, but the space that we occupy was theirs once.
Mm-hmm.
Was it?
Yes.
Is that confirmed or just a theory?
He could be lying, but he who walks behind said that they once ruled this place basically, and they will again.
They said it in Deadbeat too, when Harry's first describing the outsiders, how they were the foot soldiers of the old gods that were locked away from reality.
Right, and that's a super common trope. Anytime there are old gods, they used to be here, or sometimes in H.P. Lovecraft you get a little bit of both, where they used to always be here, but were never here, and they kind of spilling in. But it's pretty common that they got banished somehow.
Basically, every JRPG does that too. So yeah.
Right.
Yep.
What's the next story?
Day one again, which EG should talk about because it's the best story in the whole Dresden Files.
What?
Sorry, what is this Day One you speak of?
I think he was the Fistful of Warlocks.
Jedi Knight Butters gets his first mission from God and fights a killer teddy bear.
Yeah, it's a good story.
I mean, that's it. That's all you got to know, man.
Stupid.
He fights him. He fights the monster to the cadence of. You call that polka 9 or whatever. I'm just kidding. But he throws on his Weird Al music and fights him blind and uses the music to figure out where the monster is, because supernatural critters jitter up technology. So every time the technology starts to buzz, he knows where the creature is going to be and is able to parry and attack. And then quite literally the creature is like feeding on children in a children's ward and a homeless person that I don't entirely remember why that part, but basically
he's put there because he has the same symptoms. And
yeah,
I don't know why she chose him.
He knew that
connected to nightmares, like the toy that became a monster was about consuming the nightmares so that kids wouldn't have them again. And homeless people have nightmares too. He was in the bad place at the wrong time, and he got attacked. And then when he started developing a bunch of symptoms and not wanting to be asleep, I think they shoved him in the same place where all the other kids were having symptoms.
Well, yeah, but I mean, Butters found him on the street first. Like, that's what precipitates the whole story. So that's why, like, it seemed like he had been in the hospital before, didn't want to go back, which is what kind of precipitated that story and the whole like, wait a minute, this guy looks like he's got a quest as an NPC from WoW. And because that's how Butters sees his calling instead of smelling pizza or poopy diapers or whatever. Because Sonya's whole thing is like smell, right? You know, so he sees quests. They go there. Yeah, turns out that teddy bears can sometimes be guardians for children, and if you eat enough nightmares, then maybe sometimes you become a nightmare. And so this critter was doing that, and Butters fights it. At one point, he calls Dresden for help, and Dresden says, "Look, I'm taking the kid to the zoo." Yeah. That let me tell you something about. Tell you a little line from one of the wisest guys that I know. The Lord's not going to give you a burden bigger than your shoulders can bear. Bye. Good luck. Let me know how it goes. You know. So.
And storming the castle.
Right. But I liked it as a nice little bit of continuity where it's like these two stories are happening at the same time. And the first time around, I'm like, damn, Dresden, that's really cold. But at the same time, like, I kind of get it. But still, like, there was just a lot going on there. And I wish it would have been handled slightly differently than just the whole, like, I'm taking the kid to the zoo, so I can't be arsed to answer the phone right now. But I did anyway.
Well, I think this is...
How about you were a dick in the last book? I don't want to help you.
This is the lesson that he's been needing to learn forever. It's just that he needs to let people grow into their own capable beings to protect themselves, because when he's not there, they get squished. And he's learned this with like Murphy and the Alphas and then Molly. Of like, he needs to be harsher on them and make sure that they can, like the Svartals with the Bigfoot stories, they need to go up against these themselves.
Right.
And now he's accepted that. So he says, no, you have to handle this. This is yours.
Yeah, I guess it's just the first line is, I'm not coming. What? I'm not coming. You know, like, deal with it yourself. Right. So it's definitely more the angry Dresden, which I feel like Zude helps set up quite a bit as well, where it's like, you know, I think we're moving on from the, you know, Dresden's kind of the quirky guy that we invite over for games and he's kind of fun and shit. Like, no, you've got quote unquote nice Dresden, and then you've got like Hell's Fury Dresden. Like, that's what you're gonna get.
But yeah, I, on a unrelated note but related to the story, is that the guy who read the audiobook part was not James, but I don't remember his name, but he also does Monster Hunter International. I think he did a very good Butters.
I wonder how that relates.
I mean, Monster Hunter International, just a weekly reminder, but that's not what I wanted. What I wanted was to say that I actually think he did a very good Butters. I don't know if you listened to it. The guy
I think I would listen to it in the anthology, but the anthologies didn't necessarily use the same narrators, right? So
right.
Hello, is it working?
Yep, we're here.
I mean, Benjamin, they were back.
Oh yeah, no, it's fine. It works, right? You can hear me.
He's busy staring at the cat.
Right.
Yes, the cat is very cute. It's very distracting.
Look at cat pictures on your own time.
I was not looking.
No, it's better when Andres' voice comes out of a cat that's sleeping.
Yeah. It's perfect. It's beautiful. It looks beautiful. Andreas, talk louder so we can just see the cat.
No, I can control the camera. The cat is on the camera.
Yeah, they're not.
So we are all the cat.
Yeah.
The next and basically last story that we have already kind of discussed, might as well do it again, is Fistful of Warlocks, since we've already done Zude.
Yeah.
Very good book, and I'm very interested to have the McCoy, Injun Joe, the Merlin kind of story. Like, I feel like that could definitely be done when I read that.
Like 110 years even before that.
Yeah, but you know,
you start your opinion on this story of like, this was good, I want the other one.
No, it's just that he can do before modern times and characters in their younger self very well. What's my point?
Right.
This one could have benefited from being a fuller story, because I definitely felt like, let's just mush in the fact that Wyatt Earp is part of the, you know,
Venatori.
Yeah, like,
Venatorian.
yes,
And
I'm
maybe
here to
Doc
save
Holliday,
you,
too.
and let's kill a bunch of zombies on the way out, and, you know, shit. You know, there wasn't nearly as much meat to this one as, like, if this one had been the same length of, say, Backup, or something along those lines, like, it could have been perfect. Because we could have gotten a little bit more Detective Lucio, we could have gotten a little bit more Warden Badass Lucio.
We got more crazy Kemmler.
Yeah, a little bit more violating the first laws, Lucio. A little bit more, you know, of the Venatori and the Wild West and everything like that. But as it is, it feels like, you know, she shows up. We get the Western trope of her riding her tired horse into town. She finds who she's looking for. They get jumped at the sheriff's, you know, place after hours. They shoot their way out through zombies, and, you know, the bad guys ride away, and they ride off after them. You know, like, that's the story. Like, so I mean,
it interwove a lot of those Western tropes very nicely, I think, with the setting. You know, it's the tired horse, but it's a tired horse who talks. Who's a Nakan, who's a Fey thing. You know,
that's fair. Yeah.
And, you know, you go to the saloon on the bad side of town, and you sense the evil aura in it. And so there's a lot of the logical consequences of blending the settings that come across very nicely. I think the best part of this is probably the world building, and the sharpshooting is kind of a nice thing too.
Right. And I also like the fact that, like, Gravane was there, so you get name dropped a little bit, and, you know, right. Lucio's fought him and everything. So when she links up later in Deadbeat and, like, yeah, I know these fools. I've fought them before, like, multiple times. And the implication that Lucio's been on the trail for a very long time, you know, that, you know, she was here. She presumably fought them again at some other point in the near future. Then you've got the whole, you know, World War I, World War II thing, and the 60s, which, you know, was the whole council and all of that jazz. So, you know, it's just kind of fun to see this being like, yeah, he's been running around stirring shit up for 100 years. So
it's also why she has Morgan as an apprentice, because we found out a couple months ago his parents were killed by necromancers, presumably the one she's been chasing up and down.
Right. Yeah.
Which also kind of explains his apoplectic reaction in Deadbeat.
Yeah, well, he's just, you know, he's a fanatic anyway.
Yes, and then he sees an undead dinosaur and just has very, very valid reasons for why he was freaking out.
Yeah, because he didn't get to ride it. He was jealous.
I would have liked to see another aspect of the necromancy magic. So rather than kind of repeating the thing with the drum, if there's some other angle that maybe Kemmler and his disciples are attempting at that time, maybe they're perfecting body switching or something. But there's a little bit of this that seems like a retread of Deadbeat.
It could be, you know, prequelitis in the sense that it's like we're talking about, yes, it's Kemmler, but it's Junior Kemmler, right? So right. He doesn't have the super cool badassery. Maybe he hasn't written the word yet. So his scariness is the fact that he thinks that he should be doing this and economics of scale. Whereas, you know, beforehand, it's like, yeah, sure, I've raised an undead servant. You know, who doesn't? Whereas Kemmler's like, one, there's so many dead people. There's dead people everywhere. We should totally make this a thing, you know? So it's kind of interesting because it could be something that would be fun in its own right. Like, there's so many paths in the Dresden verse that I feel like deserve to be fleshed out. In the sense that it's like, I'd love to see the White Council go to war with a bunch of necromancers and see a bunch of that stuff play out. But, you know, there's no indication at any point really that they got away from the drumming restriction, right? Because that's the whole replaces the heartbeat thing. So it seems pretty integral to the neatness there. But yeah, clearly the Corpse Taker either was something or learned something to give her those kinds of powers. And for whatever reason, either she was the only one who did it or the only one who could do it, you know, so.
Do we recognize specific of Kemmler's disciples there in Straight Outta Tombs?
I think it's only Gravane that's...
Yeah, it's just Gravane.
Just Gravane, no.
Because I think there was one or two red shirts, right? Because doesn't Lucio bring a couple down, and then Gravane's the one that's, like, competent, and then Kemmler gets away with Gravane. So,
I mean, plus Gravane's his first student, and if this is his, quote unquote junior time, I mean, I forget exactly how long Bob said went into engineering World War I, but it was at least 50 years. So, this was him early days.
Right.
Well then.
Well,
I think we have managed to tie up Briefcases in about 2 parts, 2.5.
3.
Easily 3. I say 11, but 3 is good.
All right. So plug the stuff.
Okay, so for shows, for other podcasts, if you like us, maybe you like listening to some of our friends. How do you laugh about that? We're professionals. You got to be serious right now. So
when did that happen exactly?
Somebody gave me $1 once. That makes me a professional, right? So
if the director is not lying, we've had this entire episode focused on a cat.
Yeah, because we know the internet, because we're professionals. Know your audience, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind a conventional setup, but the cat is just so adorable. I can just watch the cat as I'm listening to Justin.
Okay, well, that's weird. So anyway, so other podcasts that we have that are just as professional as we are. So we have Dangerous to Go Alone, but I believe they're on hiatus now, right?
Yes.
So if you want to get into some other podcasts and you want to know that it ends at some point, then you can catch up on Dangerous to Go Alone, whereas like we record on the regular still. Somehow, right?
Professionalism. Did we not just go through this?
Because in 2 weeks we're going to go back to the alignments part 12. So we're doing the letter M part 3, right? That's the episode we're on.
Yep.
So yeah.
I'm going
all
to catch whatever Andre says that week.
Other podcasts that you might enjoy is the Great Scott podcast, which is a podcast about The Office, and then High Fantasy, which also has the director and probably not a cat. So
it's true. It doesn't have a cat. We've also been not professional and not recording lately. So you can catch up on all previous episodes.
Alrighty. And then one that actually might be professional, we have Sim Talk, which is done by Jacob, that you might remember from the 42 podcast. And, he's actually had people and recorded episodes and stuff. So yay. That's it. That's what we got. So,
yeah. You can bug everyone else to start another one, though.
Yes. That's our bi-weekly who's up for the next podcast, right?
I hear Ben is going to make a pretty shoddy Star Trek podcast.
Right.
If I'm going to make a shoddy podcast, it's going to be about RPGs.
Okay, now we know that.
There you go.
So that'll start.
Justin is doing
shoddy.
all
It'll
it takes
fulfill your
to be doing
expectations.
RPGs. That's great. We've got some new shows coming up.
Oh my goodness! No,
Scheduled for the 5th of Never. It's a very busy day.